Not that long ago, I was invited to spend a few days at the historic home of James Madison. James Madison, the fourth president of the United States, the father of the Constitution, the architect of the Bill of Rights. Now, James Madison called his estate Montpelier. Montpelier is absolutely beautiful. It's several thousand acres of rolling hills, farmland, and forest, with breathtaking views of the Blue Ridge Mountain. But it's a haunting beauty, because Montpelier was also a slave labor camp. You see, James Madison enslaved more than 100 people over the course of his lifetime, and never freed a single soul, not even upon his death. The centerpiece of Montpelier is Madison's mansion. It's where James Madison grew up, where he returned to after his presidency, and where he eventually died. The centerpiece of Madison's mansion is its library, where James Madison conceived and conceptualized the Bill of Rights. When I visited, the director of education, Christian Coates, cool white dude, took me almost immediately to the library. And it was amazing to be able to stand where such an important moment in American history had happened. But then, after a while, Christian actually took me down to the cellars of the mansion. Now, the cellars of the mansion are where most enslaved African Americans who managed the house spent most of their time. When we were down there, Christian instructed me to do something I thought was a little bit strange. He told me to take my hand and place it along the brick walls of the cellar, and to slide it along until I felt these impressions and ridges along the face of the brick. White people, am I right? There's a difference between the manicured histories we tell our children and the full stories of our families. We tend to leave out tales such as awkward love affairs, suicides, and alcoholism. We do this to protect our children and to encourage their respect and loyalty. But little do we know that it's actually harmful to our children, because our children deserve to know what the chemical imbalance runs in their blood. They deserve to know their history and mistakes ancestors have made in the past. This is the core warning of the 2020 Ohio State TEDx talk, where our national refusal to acknowledge the ugliness of our past prevents us from acknowledging the ugliness of our present, nor to perceive the only sensible and reasonable way out: confronting our history. By Professor Hazan Kwame Jeffries. But after a while, I do feel these impressions. It takes me a second to realize what they are. What they are tiny handprints? Because the bricks at James Madison Estate were made by the children he enslaved. The library was James Madison conceived and conceptualized. The Bill of Rights rests on a foundation made by slaves. And this is hard history. It's hard history because it's hard to imagine the inhumanity that leaves one to enslave children. Hard history because it's hard to imagine the violence of slavery, the beatings, the whippings, the kidnappings, the forced family separation. So rather than confronting hard history, we tend to avoid it. Now sometimes that means just making stuff up. I can't tell you how many times I heard people say that state rights was the primary cause of the Civil War. That would actually come to a surprise to the people who fought in the Civil War. Sometimes we try to rationalize hard history. When people visit Montpelier and learn about Madison enslaving people, they often ask, well, wasn't he a good master? a good master. There's no such thing as a good master. And sometimes you just pretend the past didn't happen. I can't say how many times people say that it's hard to imagine slavery existing outside the plantation south. No, not even. Slavery existed in New York for 50 years after the American Revolution. So why do we do this? Educator Ricky Gibson had the truth of it when he said that a problem with America is that we actually hate history. What we love is nostalgia. Stories about the past that make us feel better about the present. But George Santayana said that those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. And I spent a lot of time thinking about this. And in a way, it applies to us. But in a way, it doesn't. Because inherent in the statement is the notion that at some point we stop doing the things that created inequality. And the truth is, we haven't. For example, median white household wealth is $148,000. Median black household wealth is $4,000. How do you explain this growing wealth gap? Hard history. Now, my parents, both social workers, actually managed to purchase a home in Crown Heights for $55,000. Crown Heights at the time was an all-black neighborhood, and it was pretty rough. My brother and I often went to bed hearing gunshots, but my parents protected us, and they held on to that home for 40 years. They're still there to this day. But 20 years ago, something coincidentally American happened. They went to bed one night in an all-black neighborhood and woke up the next morning in an all-white neighborhood. And as a result of gentrification, not only did their neighbors mysteriously disappear, but the value of their homes skyrocketed. So that home that they purchased for $55,000 at 29% interest is now worth 30 times what they paid for it. 30 times! Do the math with me. That's 55,000 times 30, carry the zero. That's a lot of money. So when it comes time for my parents to pass down that asset, that will be the first time in my family's history, over 150 years after the end of slavery, that there will be a meaningful transfer of wealth. And it isn't because family members haven't saved, haven't worked hard, haven't valued education. It's because of hard history. So when I think about the past, my concern about not remembering it is not that we repeat it if we don't remember it. No, my concern, my fear is that if we don't remember it, we continue to do the things that created inequality. So what we must do is disrupt the continuum, confront hard history directly, magnify hard history for all the world to see. We can do this by speaking truth, teachers teaching hard history to their students. To do anything else is to be conflict. And parents must speak the truth to their children so they understand we have come from as a nation. And finally, we must all act on truth, individually and collectively, publicly and privately, and in small ways and in large. We must do the things that will bend the arc of this world universe towards justice. History reminds us that we as a nation stand on the shoulders of political giants such as James Madison. But hard history reminds us that we as a nation stand on the shoulders of enslaved African Americans. Little black boys and little black girls who with their bare hands created the arcs that serve as a foundation for this nation. And if we are serious about creating a fair and just society, then we will do well to remember that. And we will do well to remember them.